What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Monday, February 3rd edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. And this show is going to be a little bit different than usual, just because of the Damian Lillard news that came out like 10 minutes ago. It's the reason that I was like a few minutes late getting started, was trying to update for that. But don't have any good ownership projections to use yet. So would have been a complete waste of time to run everything and talk about player exposures, because it would 100% be changing. I assume I'd have like 100% Ryan Rollins or something at his 0% ownership or whatever. It's 2% right now. So didn't run all of that stuff. I did run my projections to see how often I think players show up in the optimal lineup, or roughly optimal lineup. So I will be able to use that as a gauge, but won't have ownership to compare it to. But still going to talk through the slate game by game like I normally do, just to be a little bit different in that regard. First show since the Luka trade, which obviously was insane. So we don't have Dallas on this slate. We don't have the Lakers. We do have the Kings on the slate. De'Aaron Fox traded last night in what would have been really exciting trade, but less exciting given that it followed the Luka Anthony Davis trade. So we do have ramifications of that a little bit. We have plenty of injury news. Crazy slate today. Bucks basically playing without their whole team against OKC. I think, and I've talked about it on shows before, I think this is like the most difficult spot to project in DFS. We saw it with Dallas against Cleveland yesterday, where you have the really short-handed team, especially when they're playing against a good opponent, like Dallas was playing against Cleveland, Milwaukee playing against OKC, because on the one hand, you get a bunch of guys that have increased opportunities because their teammates are missing. On the other hand, you have a team that's going to struggle to initiate offense. They're going to struggle to create, and they're going against a defense that can just absolutely lock them down. So, when you get really cheap players, like with Dallas yesterday, with Kelly, with Prosper, guys like that, it's not as risky because the chances of them doing relatively well for their salary when they're on the floor is pretty good, just because they're going to be out there so much. But it's when you get the guys like Dinwiddie yesterday, Klay Thompson yesterday, like on the one hand, they could just go for 40 because they're going to get those opportunities. But on the other hand, they're just going to get strapped by a really good defense. So it's really tough for me. I think it's tough in general to handle spots like that. So we'll talk about that when we get there. But another just really gross spot like we had yesterday with Milwaukee today. But starting with Atlanta taking on Detroit, nobody questionable for the Hawks, which is nice to kick things off. No Jalen Johnson still, no Bogdan Bogdanovic, no Clint Capella. Trae Young is probable. My guess at the starting lineup is the same starting lineup that they used in their last game. That's Dominic Barlow. He played like 13 minutes. I have him in for, I think, 14. So right now I have him projected as the spot starter. Maybe it goes back to being Mo Gay. I don't know, but they went Barlow last game. Krejci came off the bench again. So assuming they go with that lineup, you're getting Trae Young, Risa Shea, Dyson Daniels, a Kongwu, and basically a fake starter in Barlow. So nothing showing up a ton here. I need to change this because it's going to annoy me. This should make things look a little bit better, hopefully. Maybe. There we go. Okay, so DeAndre Hunter showing up as the main, or the highest, most likely to be optimal player for Atlanta. Sorry about that. The guys being grayed out was just throwing me off. But DeAndre Hunter showing up at the top, not really surprising there. 13% of the time. He's 5,800. Again, don't have a great feel for ownership, but I assume this 8% more or less holds. He should give you 28 to 30 minutes off the bench. Obviously, if he starts, those minutes become even more secure, but he's most likely closing each half. He's likely to give you 28 to 30 minutes off the bench with no Bogdanovic, with no Jalen Johnson. So the minutes are there for him. There's going to be plenty of other guys on this slate that look just as good, if not better. No shortage of value now that we have Milwaukee. You have plenty of mid-range guys because it's an 8-game slate. His salary has come up a little bit as well. So I think he looks fine. Nothing special. Reece at 4,600. I do want to mention him just because I think he might be going a little bit under projected minutes wise. There is a lot of volatility here still. You got 25 minutes from him a couple games ago against Cleveland. That included garbage time. But he has averaged like 28 to 29 minutes in the handful of games that he's played without Jalen Johnson and Bogdanovic. So there are minutes available for him if he's playing well. He is 4,600 though, so it's not like he's dirt cheap. And again, you have plenty of alternatives on this slate. So it kind of just looks like another one of those spots where, we do have a 70,000 entry $5 tournament, 100K to first. There is just going to be a little bit more merit to going even further off the board in a contest of that size, even compared to your typical, 15, 16, 17,000 entry tournament. So Reece is somebody that I think maybe getting slept on a little bit, but I don't mean that in the sense of like, oh, he's a great play. How does nobody see it? I mean it in the sense of like, he's probably is a 6% play instead of a 1 or a 2% play. But just wanted to mention that because I do think that there's a little bit more minutes upside for him than maybe he's getting credit for across the industry. Dyson Daniels, Trae Young, Okongwu, pretty self-explanatory, just secondary plays here. If you get to them, great. If you don't, also not a huge issue. They're all just priced pretty much correctly. One negative, or I guess one just piece to note on Okongwu is that even without Clint Capella, we haven't seen his playing time ramp up. We're still just seeing him play like 28, 29, maybe 30 minutes. So that's not to say that he'll never play more than 30, but I was kind of hoping that when the combination of Okongwu moving into the starting lineup and then Capella being out, I was hoping we would just kind of get like Okongwu playing a bunch of minutes, but that hasn't been the case. Larry Nance has been his straight backup. He's up to 4,200 though, so it becomes difficult to want to get there. On the other side for Detroit, nice matchup for them, but nothing standing out as far as priorities go because, again, this team is just healthy or, as healthy as they've been in recent games. No Jaden Ivey still, but other than that, nothing that matters on their injury report. Cade Cunningham should give you, if the game's competitive, 37, 38 minutes, factoring in blowout risk and all of that. I have him in for about 35. He is a very high upside guy, good matchup, all of that stuff, but there's just going to be plenty of other high upside guards that you can get to as well. So, 10% chance of being optimal at that price is relatively good, but I wouldn't go so far as to say he's a true priority. Jalen Duren, 6,400, center position, ton of opportunity cost there, but he has been playing more lately. He's been doing a better job of avoiding foul trouble. He's not going up against a big here that I think is super likely to draw fouls. You will have, Trae Young attacking the rim, but that gives him some block upside as well. Tobias Harris playing big minutes without Jaden Ivey. He probably looks a little bit worse now with the Milwaukee news, just because you have more cheap guys opening up. And on slates like this, I've definitely said it in the past, but on slates like this, when you're thinking about true priorities, the guys that should get the most ownership, what it's typically going to come down to is the best point per dollar players, which are generally going to be very inexpensive given the injury news that we're getting and probably will continue to get, and then just highest raw points. And if you're neither of those, you kind of just automatically get funneled into being a secondary play. Even if, you're a pretty good play, like I think Tobias Harris is, a decent value at 5,800, given the playing time that he's getting and the fact that his team has a 119 team total, he just kind of gets squeezed out by the fact that he's not the highest scorer on the slate or one of the highest scorers, and he's not one of the best point per dollar values. Still perfectly fine to land on him here and there. Same can be said for Thompson, Hardaway, Beasley. Like, they're all cheap enough. They have upside. Isaiah Stewart is sort of interesting. He's 3K flat at center. He will play every center minute that Jalen Duren doesn't play outside of garbage time, which typically goes to Paul Reed. So we haven't seen it in a while, but Jalen Duren is still capable of that, 3 fouls in, the first half type game where suddenly he plays 24 minutes and Isaiah Stewart plays like 22. So it's difficult to get to on this slate. You can see that I still have him with a very low probability of being optimal. But going back to that whole 70,000 person field thing, at least Isaiah Stewart's a pretty good fantasy producer. He just needs one guy ahead of him to get in foul trouble, or less fortunately to get injured, for him to end up being a good play, but still just plenty of other guys to get to first. Washington taking on Charlotte. Jordan Poole is questionable. That was a midday downgrade with an illness. I was talking about it in Discord the other day. I don't factor in midday downgrades for illness quite as heavily as when it's for an injury. Like if you throw somebody on the injury report at 2 p.m. with an ankle injury, I just assume he's not playing. If you tell me at 2 p.m. that he's questionable with an illness, I assume that he doesn't feel good and we'll see how things are at lock. I don't think it's like as likely that he misses, but if he does miss, it obviously opens things up here in a nice matchup for Washington. Keep in mind two things that are just generally positive for Washington in games that have relatively close spreads. Now, this is a team that is fully capable of getting blown out by anybody. They are absolute garbage. They just lost by like 40 to Toronto. So it's never safe going to them, but their salaries are based on the fact that they are blown out frequently. So when you do get them in competitive games, they are generally going to be a little bit under projected and look like good plays. This is why even in games with bigger spreads, they're a team that you can target in tournaments, because if they do happen to keep the game close and their guys play full minutes, they're not priced to play, 34 minutes or whatever if you're Jordan Poole. So you do have that working for you. And then also, one thing that's just nice about Washington in general, a lot of times when you get the worst teams in the league, they run really shitty rotations, really unpredictable rotations. They play, 10 guys, 11 guys, 10 and a half, whatever you want to call it. Washington doesn't do that. Washington played 9 guys straight in their last game. We'd seen earlier in the year that when they were healthier, they would just cut Jared Butler out of the rotation. He's not even available today. He's with the G League. They would cut Champagnie out of the rotation. He essentially played garbage time last game. So they really don't do as much dumb shit with their rotation as a lot of other bad teams do. You still end up getting, obviously, a decent chunk of playing time to the end of the bench guys because of blowouts. But in the competitive minutes, Washington really doesn't mess around all that much. And so it does, again, mean that if this game is competitive, you can actually project them relatively confidently. Joval, we've seen in his starts without Sar, he's burned us plenty of times, but he played 30 minutes last game. The game was finally competitive. He played 30 minutes. I have him in for 27 here. It's one of those really difficult spots to project because, like, if this game is a blowout, he's probably playing, low 20s. His median playing time in games without Sar this year is 23 minutes. But I also just think that those starts have been kind of skewed a little bit more towards blowouts than is actually likely, especially in a game that does only have, 4.5, I think it is, point spread. So Joval to me does look good. Still 5,800. Very good point per minute guy. He does take a little bit of a hit in his rates when he's sharing the floor with both of Poole and Kuzma, but it's still, a good point per minute rate. It's just not 1.3. It's like 1.1. In this spot, I think he looks very good. Jordan Poole, if he is able to play at 6,700, looks good. I think Kuzma looks fine at 6,200. Clearly, along with Joval, likely to be the 3 highest usage guys for this team. Then you start moving into the secondary options that don't look quite as good. Koulibaly, 5,300, shooting guard, small forward, does have good positional eligibility, does play big minutes generally in competitive games, played, I think, 36 and a half last game. I can see landing on him here and there, but not a priority. Keyshawn George has been in the starting lineup, but his minutes have been trending down. Malcolm Brogdon being back does create a situation where you basically know that, not that you know how many minutes Joval is going to play, but you know that essentially Joval and Holmes and Vucevic are splitting 48 minutes, Vucevic getting the minutes in garbage time. They're more or less splitting 48. We've seen them go small a little bit lately for like a minute or so, but mostly you're getting 48 there. Jordan Poole's getting his, Kuzma's getting his as long as the game's competitive. Koulibaly's getting his. That final spot, though, is a little bit more volatile. Malcolm Brogdon came back, played like 21 and a half minutes last game. I think you could see him get up to low to mid 20s here potentially. I don't think he's like the craziest play in tournaments in the sense that if you think he's going to just go play 25, he's a decent play. But the problem is he's 5,200, and I don't think you can just pencil him in for 25. Corey Kispert, we've seen his playing time ramp up. We've seen games where he approaches 30 minutes with Washington playing this tighter rotation. On average, I expect him to play like 25 and a half. Not a great point per minute guy, so he's still not showing up for me, but he is cheap. But the point here being that George, Kispert, Brogdon, it's tough to like point to any of them and say, oh, this guy's playing 30. But if any of them did play 30, you would want them. So that is kind of the argument for them. But all of that being said, as you can see, I don't think any of them look particularly good. Rashawn Holmes is essentially Isaiah Stewart in a different uniform. Charlotte on the other side, great matchup here against Washington. They are very shorthanded, as they have been. No No LaMelo. Solon is doubtful. Brandon Miller, of course, is out. Cody Martin is out. Micic is questionable, which obviously matters. Okogie is out. Grant Williams is out. So there's a lot of minutes available here. And if Micic gets ruled out, I assume you're going to actually, I don't know. My guess is they'll start KJ Simpson. He's essentially been the backup to Micic the last couple of games, but they could go to Seth Curry. They could go to Isaiah Wong. I don't know for sure what they'll do, but the Micic news does matter because he's 5K and, secondary, tertiary option if he's in, probably playing upper 20s in minutes. But if he's out, it does open up minutes for a $4,400 KJ Simpson in some shape or form. Potentially opens up Isaiah Wong at $3,200. Potentially opens up a $4,300 Seth Curry. It is a good matchup for all of these guys. So those minutes matter. Miles Bridges, I think, is still playable at 9K. Clearly not somebody that I would want if he is popular, but I think it's getting slept on a little bit how many minutes he's playing without Brandon Miller and LaMelo. He's averaging like 37 minutes per game in the games that he's played without them. Didn't play quite as much in, I think, their most recent game. He played 34 in the most recent game. I only have him projected for 34, and he's still showing up as optimal a decent amount of the time. And I think that just has to do with the amount of value that has opened up on this slate. And it's a spot where like, he's not a great value at 9K. He's overpriced at 9K, but he's not overpriced by enough that I wouldn't have any interest in him in tournaments in a great matchup against Washington in a spot where he could conceivably be playing, upper 30s in minutes. Mark Williams likely to play low 30s. I do have one very minor concern, not very minor, one minor concern on Mark Williams rotations last game. So Mark Williams has averaged 32 or 33 minutes per game in the games that he's played without Nick Richards this year, the games he started without Nick Richards. So that's great. He played 32 minutes against Denver last game. If you just look at that, it's kind of status quo. My concern, and as you can see, I still have him projected for 31 and a half minutes. My concern is that Mark Williams played 13 minutes in the first half of that game. Diabate played all of the non-Mark Williams minutes. You got a pretty ugly split between them where it was 13 for Williams, 11 for Diabate. Then there was a different rotation in the second half. Williams ends up getting to 32 minutes, but he shared the floor with Diabate for like 5 minutes in the second half. Denver was running Jokic plus Zeke Naji lineups in that game. And so my question or concern here is, was that first half rotation a function of Mark Williams was getting torched by Nikola Jokic? The second unit was doing well. Diabate just kind of played his way into a couple extra minutes. It was a fluky thing, and Mark Williams is still just going to play 32 minutes, and Diabate's going to play 16 most games? Or was it Diabate has earned his way into a bigger chunk of playing time just based on how he's played in the games where Mark Williams was out? Charlotte's not playing for anything. They don't give a shit. Are we just going to start seeing like 26 minutes for Mark Williams, 22 for Diabate? I projected it again to be pretty much, still the Mark Williams show with Diabate just as his backup. But that is something that I'll be paying close attention to. And there is some chance that if you go to Williams, you do end up not getting the minutes that you really want, but you're also getting a matchup against Washington that he should absolutely destroy. The matchup is great. The salary is expensive. You don't have a ton of margin for error because, for one, obviously you need him to go play as many minutes as possible and get a lot of points. But just like you saw last game, last game was a really good reminder that opportunity cost just drastically increases when you're getting these centers that become expensive. Williams went for 50 fantasy points. It was completely irrelevant. It was looking like this really good 3% owned play with 50 fantasy points until $5,500 Rudy Gobert just matched him. And you start running into that issue, often at center on slates like this. So that does keep his optimal percentage in check, even though he is a very, very good play here. Nick Smith, Josh Green, both, perfectly fine last piece in type guys. Josh Green, I will mention, has averaged like 37 minutes per game in the games that he has played without Bridges and LaMelo. Not a good point per minute guy, not super cheap here at 4,500, but do want to mention that just because apparently he's not likely to get any ownership. He's probably going to be on the floor a lot in a really good matchup. Just, probably will also play like Josh Green and not produce a ton of fantasy points. Houston taking on the Knicks. Alperen Şengün is questionable here. That matters a lot. We don't have Fred VanVleet. We, of course, don't have Jabari Smith. So My guess here, if Şengün is in, is that they start Jeff Green in place of Van Vliet. That's what they did last time. It could be Aaron Holiday, but it was January 16th. You had a game without Van Vliet that Şengün was in. Jeff Green started. Everybody else, it's kind of moved up a position. I projected them to do that again. If it ends up being Aaron Holiday, then obviously you expect him to play more minutes, and he starts to look like a pretty decent value. But my assumption for now is that they go with that, which means that you just basically have secondary plays here from Houston. Amen Thompson, likely playing a ton of minutes, but he's also up to $8,300. Jalen Green should play more minutes and be a bit more involved as a facilitator and should probably get more usage as well. But he is also 7,300. I think those are the two best pieces here. Then it's Tari Eason and Şengün. If Şengün is out, you do get, I assume, Steven Adams starting. It could be Jeff Green. He started the second half last game, but Adams did get up to 25 minutes in that game. He's 4,300. If he ends up starting here, he's going to project as a good value. If Şengün is in, obviously not interested in Adams. Similarly, if Şengün is out, you're probably getting upper 20s in minutes from Tari Eason. If Şengün is in, I think it's more reasonable to project around 25 minutes for Eason. At 5,400, Eason's a good enough point per minute guy that you can still play him, but I would certainly prefer him if Şengün is out. So Stephen Leibowitz with a really good point here. I hadn't gotten to it yet, but I was going to make it too. He said if the Knicks start McBride, could be more of a chance of Aaron Holiday starting. My guess is that the starting lineups here are pretty likely to be correlated. Precious Achiuwa started. So OG Anunoby is out for the Knicks, for anybody not aware. But OG Anunoby is out for New York. Anunoby hasn't missed a game this year. Bridges hasn't missed a game. Josh Hart missed, I think, one. But the last one, either the last one or only one that Hart missed. And I'm basically just treating Anunoby, Hart, Bridges as one person because I think that they essentially are. Precious Achiuwa got the start instead of McBride. So I think if Achiuwa gets the start for the Knicks, it's likely that you get Jeff Green starting for Houston and vice versa. So my guess here is just based on what these teams have done the last time they're in this situation and the fact that they're facing each other. My guess is you get Jeff Green starting. My guess is you get Precious Achiuwa starting. But yeah, if you get McBride starting, there's probably a better chance Aaron Holiday starts too. Looking at the Knicks, I do think that they are an interesting tournament team. Again, you can't get too carried away with any of them individually, but the tendency that Tibbs has, of course, is to play his main guys more when they're shorthanded. Again, we don't have any sort of real sample size of guys being out for the Knicks this year, but if you do go back to the game Josh Hart missed, Karl-Anthony Towns played like 22 minutes in the first half. These guys, just played a ton, as you would expect. I'm not projecting 40 minutes or anything for Towns, but I do have a higher minutes projection on all of these guys than I normally would. Towns at 36, Brunson at 37, 39 to Hart, 38.5 to Bridges, 28.5 to McBride, 28.5 to Achiuwa, and then basically Payne, Sims, and Shamet just soaking up whatever other minutes are available. Not a good matchup here against Houston, but still a respectable team total for the Knicks. This just looks like a team where I would not be surprised if a lot of my lineups have just like one Knick in them, and it's kind of just spread out between them. So, I don't think that there's like one of these guys that is like a clear-cut priority, especially at their respective salaries. They are relatively expensive. Even Achiuwa is 5,100. He does have power forward eligibility, which is nice. But, you can see here that it's kind of just like 5 to 10% guys. Towns would probably be my favorite, followed by Brunson. But I think it's going to be just kind of mixing and matching Knicks guys. But I do want to reiterate that while it's difficult to say, point to one guy and say, like, this is a Bridges game, this is a Hart game, this is a Towns game, whatever. Collectively, these guys are going to play a shit ton of minutes. And that's just, that's what Tibbs does. So I do, as a team, like them. Sacramento taking on Minnesota, no De'Aaron Fox. So this is going to be a team that gets some ownership here. My assumption is that Keon Ellis moves into the starting lineup at 3,500. Also, no Kevin Huerter. And Kevin Huerter has barely been in the rotation lately, but it is still somebody that was playing a handful of minutes that will no longer be playing minutes. The Kings are a team that, run pretty tight rotations anyway. They play their starters a lot of minutes. I think that you can kind of just pencil them in to continue doing that and probably to a little bit bigger extreme here. So 36 minutes projected for Sabonis, 34.5 to Monk, 35.5 to DeRozan, 31.5 to Keon Ellis. All of these guys look pretty solid. Keep in mind that one, the ownership's going to change, but also optimal rates are generally going to be lower than ownership on the high owned guys because you're not actually trying to make the optimal NBA lineup. So don't just look at this and say like, oh, all the Kings are over owned, don't play the Kings. Just, paying more attention to the actual optimal percentages that, I think there's like a 22% chance Keon Ellis is in the optimal lineup. 15% for DeRozan, 12% for Monk, 8% for Sabonis. At these salaries, that's a pretty high number, 7% for Keegan Murray at 4,700. So I think the Kings look good here. One spot that I think is sneaky and that I would like to be attacking in tournaments is Trey Lyles here at $3,200. I don't know what the bench rotation is going to look like for Sacramento, but keep in mind that like Keon Ellis is already a guy that plays 20 minutes or so. So it's not like he's just going from 0 minutes to De'Aaron Fox's minutes and there's nothing else to replace. You're increasing Keon Ellis's minutes, taking, to end up soaking up most of the Fox minutes, but that voids other minutes. And there's been 3 games this year where De'Aaron Fox didn't play. Trey Lyles has played like 24 minutes a game in those games. I didn't go to 24, but I think that it's very likely that you see Trey Lyles play increased minutes here at only 3,200. I think there's a good chance that gets slept on because he's not an obvious replacement for De'Aaron Fox minutes. But I think that you see Trey Lyles play more here. I think he's a very sneaky way to get different in tournaments. Stephen Leibowitz said Herter gone. That's the point I was making before, where like Herter hasn't been a big piece of the rotation lately, but it's one guy that isn't getting those minutes. My guess is that Trey Lyles and Devin Carter just step into like 22 minutes for Lyles, 18 or something for Carter. So Carter at 3K, I think also somebody that is a viable just hope to get really lucky punt. But Trey Lyles here at 3,200, I think is very, very interesting, especially with power forward eligibility. I like him a lot as far as 1% owned guys go. Obviously, I'm not anticipating having like 40% Trey Lyles or anything, but I do think he's just going to go overlooked here. On the other side, Minnesota, Anthony Edwards and Naz Reid are both questionable. Julius Randle is out. DiVincenzo is out. Reid and Edwards did both go through shoot around. My assumption is that they are going to play. And I do like getting to them because with no DiVincenzo and no Randle, this is another team that generally runs a pretty tight rotation. This is a game that has a relatively close spread to solid enough teams. And I think that these guys look good. Like, you're not going to have trouble finding the salary for a $9,500 Edwards. Naz Reid at 6K, obviously left a bad taste in everybody's mouth last game because he sucked, but he got the start in place of Randle. He was playing plenty of minutes, and I think he just looks good. Not sure where the ownership will come in, but I expect, 30 minutes or so from Reid. That's pretty much what he's averaged going back to last year when he has started games without last year Karl Anthony Towns, this year Julius Randle. So I think he looks good. Conley at 4,600, likely to play upper 20s in minutes. You can roll the dice on guys like Dillingham at 3,800. Rudy Gobert, 6,300. Not showing up as optimal all that often for me. I assume just because of the position and, again, the way the slate has broken down where it kind of just points to more stars and scrubs. But Rudy Gobert has averaged 37 minutes per game going back to last season in the games where Cat was out, and then now last game with Julius Randle out. Projected him for 34 here. He did play 17 first half minutes last game, then played more because Naz Reid was out. But it's very likely that you see a lot of playing time from Gobert, especially in a matchup here with Sabonis where, not that he's going to just like shut down Sabonis, but you do have a Sacramento team where I would expect them to want Gobert to be on the floor a lot defensively. So playing time should be really good for Gobert. I think he's good if you can get there. Jaden McDaniels is up to 6,400. He does play a lot without DiVincenzo, but I would expect him to be playing, like mid 30s if Edwards and Reid play. If they both miss, you're probably looking at like 40 from McDaniels, but assuming they're both in, just kind of a secondary play there. Milwaukee is an absolute shit show. I touched on top of the show. As far as like fantasy points per minute, it's tough to even have a good feel here because OKC is so good defensively. Granted, they are missing Caruso, Wallace, and Jalen Williams. So not a full strength OKC team, but you just have a Milwaukee team that is extremely shorthanded. Brook Lopez is questionable. He looks okay to me at 5,600, but he's the perfect example of like, what are you going to get? Obviously, if they get blown out, he loses minutes. And he's not creating shots for himself. Like, his usage can only get so high. It's not like you're taking out Giannis, Portis, and Lillard and saying like, oh, we're just going to see like the Brook Lopez show. He's going to get more opportunities, but it's Brook Lopez. He can only do so much. So the one thing going for him is if this game is somehow competitive, he probably plays a lot, assuming he plays. He's already seen increased playing time without Bobby Portis. Now you take Giannis out too, and this front court that is generally a three-man timeshare, splitting essentially 96 minutes between Brolo, Giannis, and Portis. It's just Brolo left. So I do think he plays a lot if this game is competitive and if he plays. Ryan Rollins, 3,100. I assume is going to start for Dame. I expect that you'll basically get a 48-minute split between Ryan Rollins and DeLon Wright, with Rollins on the upper end of that. AJ Green, 3,300, I guessed would start. I don't know. It could be Gary Trent. It could be anybody else. But my guess for the starting lineup right now is Rollins, Green, Jackson, Prince, and Lopez. So that's going to make AJ Green look like a good value at 3,300. Taurean Prince look like a pretty good value at 4,200, probably playing 30 minutes or so, probably more, if it's competitive, but on average, probably around 30. Andre Jackson at 3,600 is playable here. Not a great point per minute guy, but should be playing like mid to upper 20s with all of the guys out that are out. Gary Trent, 4,200 is a very logical AJ Green pivot. Tyler Smith, I don't even know if he's ahead of Beauchamp in the rotation. My guess is that he is. He's showing up a little bit at 3K, but that's really just a dice roll, hope to get lucky type thing. But Ryan Rollins, assuming he starts, is just going to project as a clear priority. AJ Green at 3,300 will look really good. And then you kind of just start getting into these other secondary options. Michael Henry in chat said, is Daquan Jeffries viable on FanDuel? Probably not. I think I have him in for like 14 or 15 minutes. He really just hasn't been playing that much. He's somebody that, like, if they ran the rotations differently, he could find his way into minutes. But as long as Miles Bridges and Josh Green are playing a ton of minutes and you're getting 48 combined between Williams and Diabate, it's really difficult for him to find those minutes. For Daquan Jeffries to get minutes, you either need Bridges, Green to play less, or you need, and they did it a while ago, but they haven't done it recently. You need Charlotte to go. They did it in one of the games that Mark Williams was out. You need Charlotte to play small. That's unlikely to happen with Mark Williams in, and then we haven't seen any indications that, Bridges or Green aren't going to play a lot of minutes. On the OKC side here, Aaron Wiggins coming off the best game Aaron Wiggins will ever play. Still looks good here. 5,300, no Caruso, no Wallace, and no Jalen Williams just means that he's very likely to walk into a lot of minutes. And another thing that's really nice about Aaron Wiggins is he doesn't always play garbage time, but he frequently plays garbage time. Last game against Sacramento, he ended up playing 40 minutes in a 30 or close to 30-point win because I think it was a 34-point win because he just played straight through the fourth quarter. So it's possible he ends up in the closing lineup if it's close. It's possible he ends up just playing the fourth quarter if it's not close. Not a great point per minute guy, but it is a little bit different, or a lot different, than your typical Aaron Wiggins start where you're saying, okay, he started, but how many minutes does he actually play? Because Isaiah Joe can take them and Caruso can take them and Kaysen Wallace can take them. Like, you don't have two of those guys. So Joe already probably going to play mid to upper 20s in minutes. Looks fine at 4,200. Wiggins minutes should be a lot more secure here than they normally are. So Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe as value pieces look nice. Shea looks good at 11K. You should be able to afford him. There is blowout risk, but it's pretty likely OKC, that SGA is having a good game if OKC blows them out. The caveat is it is possible that Milwaukee just scores like 60 points and nobody on OKC has to do great offensively, but SGA should be basically the entire offense with Jalen Williams out. So certainly looks good where you can get to him. Kenrich Williams, Lou Dort, Hartenstein, all completely secondary plays. Kenrich Williams, 3,900, should be locked into a bit more playing time than usual since all those guys are out. Dort probably plays a little bit more than usual as well at 4,900. For the Spurs, De'Aaron Fox will not be there yet. So I assume we're getting a starting lineup of Paul, Castle, Vassell, Barnes, and whoever starts at center because Wemby is questionable. If Wemby is in, I like him a lot. He's 10,800. You can afford him. He is obviously he's Wemby. He's great. The big question is if he's going to play. If he does not play, you get a really good value piece at center. Charles Bassey started the last game. He ended up playing 27 minutes, and Zach Collins is no longer on this team. So if Wemby is out, you're probably getting a 4K Charles Bassey playing a bunch of minutes at center. If Wemby is in, Wemby looks good. So I like whoever is starting at center for the Spurs. As far as the backup center goes, if Wemby is out, I assume you're getting Mamukelashvili and then maybe some small lineups as well with like Sohan, who only played 19 minutes last game, surprisingly, and Keldon Johnson. But whoever's starting is going to look pretty good. If Wemby is out, Devin Vassell will look even better from a usage standpoint. If Wemby is in, Devin Vassell still looks pretty good, only 6K. Chris Paul looks fine at 5,700. Castle looks fine at 5,100. The Sohan, Keldon Johnson pieces will look a bit better if Wemby is out. Keldon Johnson, once again, played like 25 minutes last game. He is only 4,300. But again, you just have plenty of alternatives on this slate as well. For Memphis, Desmond Bane is out. John Morant is questionable. Brandon Clark is questionable. Zach Edey is available. And Marcus Smart is doubtful. Still no Cam Spencer. Vince Williams is doubtful as well. So for right now, have Morant projected in. Jaren Jackson looks pretty good at 8,300. Santi Aldama looks pretty good at 4,900. No issues with getting to either one of them. Other than that, I think it's kind of just mixing and matching Kennard, Wells, Morant, Edey. You can get to some $3,300 GG Jackson here. Keep in mind that if Brandon Clark is out, Zach Edey should play a lot more. 4,600 Zach Edey, I think, if Clark is out, goes from like whatever, if he lands in a lineup here or there, hopefully he does well in his 21 minutes, to Zach Edey's probably playing like 27 minutes and looks really good at 4,600. So do keep that in mind. You also probably see a little bit more GG Jackson if Clark is out too. So Memphis, a pretty interesting team, kind of in the same sense as like the Knicks, where there's not necessarily one guy that I absolutely love, but there's a lot of guys that I like. Indiana taking on Utah. Miles Turner is now questionable for Indiana. That was a late addition and it was an actual injury, so it doesn't seem great. But I still have him projected in for right now. They look pretty good. Really good matchup here against Utah, albeit a Utah team that is actually at full strength. Siakam, Halliburton, Turner, Nembhard all look fine. I think Siakam, Halliburton, Turner probably the biggest priorities. Then it's a little bit of a drop off to Nembhard and then to everybody else. If Turner is out, you're probably going to get a Thomas Bryant start at 3,200. So again, a really good value center. I've mentioned it before, but having some sort of strategy in place to penalize or to anticipate late swap is, I think, really important in NBA. For me, I just have something that kind of penalizes the projection on players in earlier games. But this is a perfect example of a slate where we might not have this news by lock, but if you get Miles Turner ruled out and Thomas Bryant starting, you have a massive advantage if you can get to Thomas Bryant. Now, it's not like years past where Thomas Bryant would be like 5% owned. He'll end up being popular because people late swap a lot better than they used to, but it's still something to keep in mind where like Zach Edey could be a lot better an hour after lock than he is at lock. Same for, Thomas Bryant, same for Charles Bassey. So it is pretty likely that some center value opens up here. It's just a matter of who it is. So that's something to keep in mind. Anthony said, do I think Ja plays? I don't know. If Ja is out, does Pippen become a priority? No, I don't think so. Actually, Bane's out too. So yeah, probably. I forgot Bane was out for a second. So Kennard's been starting when Morant is out, but we've had Bane in. There's a pretty good chance, I think, that you would get Pippen starting if Morant ends up being out. I assume you would get a starting lineup of... So, like, if Morant's in, I assume you're getting Morant, Kennard, Wells, Jackson, Edey. I would guess that if Morant is out, you're getting Pippen, Kennard, Wells, Jackson, Edey. So, yeah, Pippen ends up looking really good, I think, if Morant is out. Let me double check his price. He's a good point per minute guy. So the issue is always just how many minutes is he going to play. Yeah, he's 4,500. He's going to end up probably looking good, assuming he starts if Morant is out. Either way, like even if he doesn't start, he's probably playing 25, 26 off the bench. But I assume he would just start. On the other side for Utah, essentially a healthy Utah team, which means that none of them are going to look that great. John Collins, 6,500, Markkanen, 7K. I think you can play them some. They are obviously solid fantasy producers. They're in a good matchup. They're not very expensive, which is nice. Like 7K for Markkanen is a really nice salary. 6,500 for Collins, assuming he's going to play around 30, actually looks pretty good. Beyond that, though, Collier's price is pretty much where it should be. Kessler, Sexton, Clarkson, George, these guys are all priced pretty much correctly. But I think it's the guys coming back, Collins and Markkanen, that are the most interesting from Utah. And then finally wrapping things up with the Pels in Denver. The Pels are a shit show. Daniel Tice was ruled out before this show, or as this show started. We do not have Ingram. We do not have, I'm trying to find the actual updated injury report. We don't have Ingram, don't have Jones, don't have Murray, who's, of course, done for the year. Don't have Tice, as I mentioned. No Keon Brooks, which doesn't matter. Hawkins is available. And then Zion not on the injury report. So Zion, I think, looks good here. 8,500. The playing time obviously is an issue. Likely to give you around 28 minutes, but he's doing everything when he's on the floor. He's producing at a very high rate. So I do like getting to Zion. It's likely you see him take on a bigger playmaking role without Murray as well. We have seen plenty of point Zion in the past. I would expect we see some of that tonight. Alvarado, 4,800, probably starting. Doesn't have to. I don't know if he will or not. But either way, should be playing more. He's 4,800, solid value there. You should just get a bunch of minutes from Murphy and McCollum. 4,500 Hawkins is like a natural pivot to Alvarado, I think, assuming Alvarado is going to be quite a bit more popular. I do prefer Alvarado, though. With Tice out, Misi's playing time should look a little bit better, probably. Still not enough to make me think that he's going to look like a really good play on this slate, though, given all of the really good center options and the fact that we're likely to have even better center options by then. And then finally with Denver, as chat is informing me, Aaron Gordon is now questionable. This is already a team that was going to look really, really good. I might end up being even a little bit higher on these minutes projections once I go back and finalize them. But I think this looks pretty close to what I would want. I didn't have time to completely finish Denver, but Denver, so we know they're missing Westbrook. We know that they're missing Peyton Watson. Now Gordon's questionable. Even if you assume Gordon is in, the rotation that Denver ran against Charlotte last game was extremely favorable for DFS. Now, there's no guarantee they do it again because they did almost lose that game to Charlotte, but they ran a straight 8-man rotation. And prior to the injuries, we had seen DeAndre Jordan being phased out of the rotation. He had, I think it kind of gone a little bit overlooked because he had played like the first half of one game and then didn't play the second half. Then he DNP'd. Then he played again, but it's because Jokic was in foul trouble. And then, so last game, my assumption was that you would get Jordan as the backup center just because that was somebody that could soak up, the 10 or 11 minutes Jokic doesn't play. And then you have your other pieces to take the minutes that are left by Watson and Westbrook. But that's not what Michael Malone did. Michael Malone just went with a straight 8-man rotation. Zeke Naji essentially became Peyton Watson. Julian Strouder played 24 minutes. Jalen Pickett was the straight backup to Jamal Murray. And other than that, Christian Brown just played a ton of minutes. Michael Porter Jr. played a ton of minutes. I assume you're going to get something very similar to that here, at least for the competitive minutes, where the Nuggets just play a tight rotation and you get a lot of $5,900 Michael Porter Jr. Jokic and Murray, obviously, barring blowouts, just play a lot anyway. Murray only played 33 last game, which was unusual and surprising. I'm not really reading into that. Aaron Gordon played 30. He looks fine at 4,500 if he's in. Christian Brown, 5,200. Last game was fluky as far as the fact he had like a 30 and 10 double-double or whatever the hell it was. But I don't think it was fluky as far as the playing time goes, especially if they're going to run that rotation where they still don't use DeAndre Jordan as the backup center. You need Christian Brown to play a lot of minutes. From a playing time standpoint, he's probably the biggest, him and Porter, the biggest beneficiaries of Westbrook being out. So Christian Brown still looks good at 5,200. Julian Strouder at 3,400 looks perfectly fine. Zeke Naji, 3,300. If he had power forward eligibility, I would actually like. At center, it's very, very difficult because of all of the opportunity costs. But the rest of the Denver guys look good. And then if Gordon is out, I honestly have no idea. I don't know what they'll do. They could start Naji alongside Jokic. I don't know if they do that. They could go Strouder and slide Porter down a spot. They could just spot start Hunter Tyson. I don't know what they'll do, but as far as the starting lineup goes, but it just means that there's even more minutes available if Gordon ends up being out. So Denver going to look really, really good here. So that wraps this one up. Thank you for checking out the show. Don't forget to sign up for Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below. If you want access to my projections, you can get those there, or by using the NBA projections link below for my Dub Club. There's a 3-day trial with that. And then also one other thing that I completely forgot to mention until now, but I will mention it on shows throughout the week. Run the Sims Super Bowl Showdown Sims tool is free for the Super Bowl. So if you are playing that slate, check that out. It is a great product, very easy to customize your own projections, put in whatever rates you think guys are going to have, whatever, if you think the spread should be wider, you can adjust that. You can then run it, simulate the game, and, get all the information that you want. It predicts how many times your lineup will be duped, all of that stuff. It's a really, really solid showdown tool over there, and it is free to use for the Super Bowl. So check that out. Other than that, thanks for checking out the show, and I'll see you back here again tomorrow.